Hello and welcome to Business Insider with Mario Toneguzzi on YYC Business, brought to you today by MegaPixx Media. Joining me is Duane Bratt, a political scientist with Mount Royal University here in Calgary. Thanks for joining us today, Duane.
You're welcome, Mario.
Well, lots of stuff going on in politics these days. Let's start with the federal election, talking about what's going on there. What are your first impressions of the campaign trail right now in sort of the early going of this election?
Well, I'll start with the Liberals as the incumbent because they chose this election. They were not defeated in a non-confidence vote. The timeline hadn't hit, so they chose this moment to campaign. But over the first almost 2 weeks now of the campaign, they've looked stunningly unprepared.
Yeah.
The Afghanistan thing, that cropped up like the day that they called the election. That had been telegraphed for a while, so I think they were stuck on that timetable.
Yeah.
So, I don't think there's a connection between Afghanistan and the election call, but it's become an election story over the first 2 weeks. But the reason I say they looked unprepared is that they're going to the old bag of liberal tricks really early in the campaign. Going after Erin O'Toole on having a hidden agenda around abortion. Well, Erin O'Toole has said that he is pro-choice, and this has not just been in the campaign, it's been in his whole life. The Harper government was in power for 9 years. There was no change in our abortion policy. So to see them pulling that card out this early in the campaign, and same thing with privatizing healthcare. They put up a video, really manipulated so badly that Twitter flagged it, where they truncated much of Erin O'Toole's comments, which put them out of context, which seemed to suggest he was supporting private healthcare, when in fact he was supporting the status quo, where about 30% of our healthcare is privately run.
Yeah.
Private pharmaceutical companies like Shoppers Drug Mart or Rexall, private doctors' offices, dentists' offices, optometrists. None of this is new. Now the government, instead of apologizing for the video, has doubled down on these attacks, and they have brought up Saskatchewan's private MRI clinics, which they said they'll claw back federal healthcare funds because of the existence of these clinics, which have been operating for years, and yet now it's become an election issue. So attacking the Conservatives over abortion and healthcare has been something that the Liberals have done for 2 decades. The fact that they're doing it this early suggests that they think there's something going wrong with the campaign, and the polls show that. Depending on which poll you look at, the Conservatives are either slightly ahead or about even with the Liberals. And given that in the pre-writ period, they were down 5 to 8 points, that's a remarkable sea shift.
Mm-hmm. How do you think the Conservatives have done in this campaign so far?
They got off to a rocky start on day one when O'Toole was asked about vaccine passports and about whether he would require his candidates to be vaccinated. I think he has recovered from that, especially given some of the complications around the federal vaccine policy. But other than that, I think he's defended himself well against the attacks on abortion and on healthcare. And Trudeau made in the first week a major gaffe that played right into the Conservative playbook. The Conservatives have been talking about inflation, and the Conservatives have been talking about the increased cost of living. Trudeau was asked about the mandate of the Bank of Canada, which is coming up for renewal. And he gave a very dismissive response about how he doesn't really care about monetary policy, when it comes to ordinary Canadians. Well, that question was about inflation targets. It was about the cost of living. Those things directly affect Canadians. So Trudeau inadvertently supported a major talking point of the Conservatives. So I think the Conservatives have run so far a good campaign. They struggled in the pre-writ period, but it looks like O'Toole is doing much better. Plus, he's relatively unknown. I mean, political watchers know who Aaron O'Toole is, but I don't think many Canadians do. And it's given him an opportunity to explain himself.
Mhm.
Finally, of the three major party leaders, I think Jagmeet Singh has had a very good campaign. He's a likable person. He is doing well in polls amongst the leaders. He's done some good campaigning, but he's being graded on a curve because nobody is really digging into his party platform, which the math just doesn't add up. He's talking about spending in a whole variety of issues that can all be solved by taxing billionaires. Well, there's simply not enough billionaires in Canada to justify those costs. But people know that Singh isn't going to become prime minister. What he could do is have a higher degree of influence in the next parliament.
True. Now, we're still, close to a month away from election day, so lots can happen, in that time period. But right now, what's your gut call on what?
I mean, it's still early, and if you're going to make mistakes, as the Liberals have, it's best to make them at the beginning of the campaign as opposed to the end of the campaign, and particularly in August. So while I'm watching this quite closely, I think lots of Canadians have tuned this out. They're either on holidays or their brain is still on holidays. I think there's going to be an awful lot of activity post Labor Day. You're going to see, about a 12-day sprint after Labor Day. And I think that's really where the campaign is going to be won and lost. What this has done for the Conservatives is that they have removed the edge that the Liberals have had. Now they're on a more level playing field. Let's see how it goes about over the rest of the campaign. There's still a lot of strengths that the Liberals have. There's still some weaknesses that the Conservatives have had. But so far, the Conservatives have run a good campaign and the Liberals have not.
Okay, let's talk closer to home. The Calgary municipal election coming up. It'll be roughly a month after the federal election in October. What are your thoughts so far on this campaign and how it's being run?
I mean, we saw campaigning going on throughout the summer. By the big campaigns. I'm seeing lots of lawn signs out there. There's been door knocking teams that have come by my house. So they've been doing a lot of campaigning. I think a lot of that is paused now. And I think it's paused because of the federal election. Media coverage has all been devoted to the federal campaign. If I was a municipal candidate, it would probably be a good time for me to go on holidays. And just once again, wait for after Labor Day. The challenge is you've got a month between the two elections. Normally that's fine, except this time the federal election will have an impact on the municipal election. So, and it's because of the provincial referendums that are being tied to that around equalization and around the Senate elections that I think the vote on those is going to be based on what happens in the federal election in September. So the summer is used for some initial door knocking. It's getting your platform ready. It's getting your volunteers ready. It's raising some money. But typically, even the municipal campaign will start to take off after Labor Day. I think in this case, they're going to wait a bit longer until September 21st. But I also wonder if there's going to be either voter fatigue going from one election to the next, and there could very well be volunteer. I wonder how many volunteers that were signed up for municipal candidates are actively involved in the federal campaign and whether they will come back to their municipal candidates.
Yeah. So when you look at the candidates that are out there municipally, who do you think are the front runners?
So on the mayor's race, you've got, I think, the three sitting councillors, Jeff Davison, Jeremy Farkas, and Jody Gondek, I think, are at the forefront of this. It's going to be tough for an outsider to get into that mix because we have three councillors. In the past, when there's been an open seat, there might be one counselor like Rick McIver in 2010, who was a front runner, and then you had Barb Higgins and Naheed Nenshi. I think this more closely resembles the 2001 campaign, where you had, city councilors like Dave Bronconnier and Bev Longstaff and Richard Magnus going head to head. And it makes it tough for an outsider like a Brad Field, for example, to get traction. The other reason it's interesting is that the three sitting councilors are all so different.
Yeah.
So you really have a choice. You've got sort of the heir apparent to Naheed Nenshi and Jody Gondek. You've got sort of the establishment conservative in Jeff Davison. And then you've got the guy who just wants to throw out City Hall in Jeremy Farkas.
Yeah.
And so the fact that you've got three very different viewpoints means it's tough for some non-counselor to get traction.
Okay, super then. The last question I want to ask you is more on the premier, Jason Kenney in Alberta. Where do you think his popularity is these days, considering everything that's gone on in the province?
It's weak, and which is why when Justin Trudeau was in Calgary, he spent more time attacking Jason Kenney than he did Aaron O'Toole. When Jagmeet Singh was in Edmonton, he did the same thing. I expect that in the federal election, both the Liberals and possibly the NDP will pick up additional seats in the province. And a lot of that is due to the unpopularity of Jason Kenney. I don't think it's a coincidence that Kenney is on holidays right now. I don't begrudge anyone from taking holidays, especially someone who works as hard as Jason Kenney. But I think he might have been tipped off that maybe the last 2 weeks of August would have been better than the first 2 weeks of August to stay out of the limelight, because he's a known campaign fighter. So if he was around, he would be responding back to Trudeau and Singh. And I don't think that would do Aaron O'Toole very well. So I think Jason Kenney, if there was a provincial election today, he would be defeated. He still has time to recover, but he's not very popular right now. And we're at the beginning of a fourth wave of COVID. And so a lot of people are questioning his COVID policies.
Okay. And do you think that's the sole or main reason of his plunging popularity? So
I think that is a major component to it. But I think his popularity started to go down pre-COVID. We've seen that in opinion polls. We also have to look at some of his energy policy, which, when he campaigned, he was going to fight back on behalf of the energy sector. He doesn't have a whole lot of wins on here, right? He's got a war room that has been an embarrassment. He's got this Allen inquiry into foreign funding of environmental groups, which has been another embarrassment for him. He invested $1.5 billion into the KXL pipeline, which was gone. So there hasn't been a whole lot of wins on the energy front either, despite the screaming and yelling and confrontational style. So while COVID, I think, is a large part of that, I don't think it's exclusively due to COVID.
Okay. Great. Thanks a lot for joining us today, Duane.
You're welcome, Mario.
We'll talk again probably closer to the federal election date. That was Duane Bratt, a political scientist with Mount Royal University here in Calgary. This has been Business Insider with Mario Toneguzzi on YYC Business, brought to you today by MegaPixx Media.